Good evening. My name is Jose. I worked as a truck driver for over 10 years. During my work, I experienced various events that some might call paranormal, because driving for miles at night invites such occurrences. This is one of the stories that affected me the most. I was leaving New York City and hit the road around 8 p.m. Wasn't tired because I had taken a long nap at a gas station. So I was ready to drive all night. Everything was as usual. The road was a bit empty that night, with almost no traffic, which I liked. It was past midnight when I suddenly saw a white minivan coming up the mountain behind me. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was someone who had decided to park there to rest. But it wasn't passing me. For obvious reasons, I had to drive very slowly. And there was always a car behind me. I signaled with my headlights for it to pass me and pull over. I did the same for this minivan, but it was still behind me, refusing to pass. I figured it was because it was nighttime and the driver might not be very experienced on the highway. So I slowed down even more and signaled again for it to pass, but it didn't. It slowed down to stay behind me. At this point, I was getting a little annoyed because I didn't know what the guy was playing at, but I decided to ignore him and keep driving. So, 2 hours passed, and the van was still behind me. I decided to pull into a gas station to use the restroom and get something to eat, but also to let the truck continue on its way and hopefully not be behind me anymore. However, when I turned into the gas station, the truck did the same. But it didn't pull into a parking spot. It stopped on the side of the road with its headlights on. I went to the restroom and bought something from the store. But when I came out, the truck was still there waiting for me. I got very angry and decided to walk over and ask the driver what his problem was. Was he following me or playing some stupid joke? I got there and started tapping on the window. The windows were completely dark. I couldn't see inside. I wanted him to open the window by knocking, not be a coward, show his face, and say he was joking, but he never opened the window. I told him that if he continued to follow me, I would report him to my other friends, who were also hustlers, and they would teach him a lesson. But at that moment, he suddenly moved and almost ran me over. I was still very angry, but I was relieved that I had finally gotten rid of him and could continue on my way in peace. I got back in my trailer, parked there for about 30 minutes, then smoked a cigarette and continued on my way. Everything was normal. It was approaching 3 a.m. when suddenly the same white van appeared behind me. I thought it was a joke. I didn't know what to do. I was quite nervous because I knew that following me for more than 3 hours was personal. So I thought about going to the next gas station an hour and a half away, parking there and asking the other truck drivers to get the guy out of the van and leave me alone. I thought about going to the next gas station an hour away to ask them to get the guy out of the van and report him because I knew he would follow me there. So I kept driving patiently. The minibus was stuck behind me, but suddenly it pulled up alongside me. I thought he was going to pass me, so I slowed down, but the minibus did the same. Its window level with mine. I knew the driver was watching me, so I honked my horn to tell him to back off because I thought it was dangerous. But at that moment, the minibus started getting closer and closer to my trailer. I didn't know what to do. I was just honking, asking him what the hell he was doing. At that moment, I felt him hit my trailer. I lost control of the steering wheel, and I veered off the road, broke a fence, and came to a stop in the middle of the woods. I was okay, but the engine had completely stopped and wouldn't start when I tried. I tried to use the radio, but it didn't work either. There was no signal on my cell phone either, so I couldn't call for help. To be honest, I was a little scared because it was 3 a.m. I was in a deserted place, my communication was cut off, and there was no one to help me. As if that wasn't enough, I suddenly saw lights approaching, and my heart stopped because those lights were the white van that had been following me all night. It parked behind me and turned off its headlights. I locked my window and grabbed the knife I always carry with me. The only thing that came to mind was that it might be a gang wanting to kidnap me, because security was at its worst. However, 5 minutes passed and no one got out. I made the difficult decision to get out and talk to the man, to ask him to leave me alone and go away. I did that. With the knife in my pants pocket, ready to use, I slowly walked towards where the minibus was parked. I had turned on the flashlight on my cell phone because I couldn't see anything. We were far from the road, surrounded by mountains, with the sounds of the night in the background. I reached the minibus and stood next to the window. I knocked twice and said, "Hello, can we talk? Please open your window," but there was no response. I pressed my head against the window to see inside and put my hands next to my eyes. Guys, there was nothing inside. I looked in the back. There was nothing there either, just a pile of trash. It was clear the minibus had been abandoned for a long time. I opened the door and saw it was completely empty. I can't describe the horror I felt. I just kept wondering who had been following me all this time. I wondered who the person following me was. I ran back to my camper, but before getting in, I saw a man standing a few meters in front of my camper. I saw his shadow in the truck's lights. I said hello to him, but he didn't answer. He just gestured with his hand for me to follow him. I hesitated, but I did. I thought he needed help. He was walking very fast, and I could barely see him from a distance. I should mention that the place smelled terrible, like dead animals. I continued to follow the man, but suddenly he stopped and started staring at a specific spot on the ground. I ran over there, but when I arrived, the man was no longer there. I used my cell phone flashlight to search for him and shouted to see where he was, but he didn't show up. Then I turned my head to where the man had been staring, and there were 3 bodies there. I don't know how long they had been there. I couldn't even tell if they were men or women. Seeing that scene affected me deeply. I ran away from there and got into my trailer, but the white van was gone, vanished. I tried to start the trailer, and miraculously, it started on the first try. I left there and called the police to report my discovery. I was driving with tears streaming down my face, deeply affected by what I had just seen. When I arrived at my location, 2 of my co-workers were there. When they saw me getting out of the truck, they ran over to see what had happened. I didn't know how to explain to them what had happened that night. I explained as best I could, and they stayed there with me. That reassured me, because I couldn't continue driving in that state. At that moment, my cell phone rang. It was one of the detectives who had come to the location I had specified. He said they wanted to ask me a few questions. I told them where I was. They arrived about half an hour later. There were 2 detectives. They asked me how I found the bodies and what I was doing there. I didn't know how to answer them because I knew it was hard to believe, but I risked being seen as a liar and taken into custody as a suspect, and told them everything. When I finished talking, one of the detectives took out a photo and showed it to me. The photo was of the van that had been following me all night. The detective asked me, "Is this the van?" I looked at it in shock and said yes, It was the van. They looked at each other, and the other detective told me that this van belonged to the 3 young people found dead in Monte. These young people were 3 students who had been missing for weeks. Their families had reported them missing and said they had set out for Juarez to report on women who had disappeared in that city. They were studying journalism but had never reached their destination, and there had been no news of them for 2 weeks. That's why it was so important to know how I had found them. The young people had been shot dead, and they wanted to expose my connection to the gangs. I was deeply affected. I started crying and told them that this was the truth. The detectives told me to stay calm and to call them if I remembered anything. Then they left. After that, I was very affected, thinking about those kids, those spirits who chose me to find their bodies, and their families giving up on looking for them. This was the most difficult thing I experienced in my entire career as a truck driver. Thank you for listening. Before moving on to the next story, I would like to ask you to like this video. That way, I can understand whether you like our content or not. Thank you very much. Let's continue. My name is Gerardo. I worked as a transporter for various companies for a long time. Now that I'm 70, I've retired. However, during my time as a truck driver, I experienced many supernatural events. The incident I'm about to share happened 20 years ago. I was traveling from Nuevo Leon to Mexico City. The journey took about 10 hours. It was nighttime, but I loved traveling at night because the roads were a bit emptier. I enjoyed that sense of peace and solitude. I was listening to music as usual when suddenly I saw a man hitchhiking by the side of the road in the distance. I pulled over immediately. Back then, it was very common to see people hitchhiking, and I always accepted them. I liked helping people, and this time was no exception. He was a man in his 60s, wearing dirty and somewhat old clothes. "Where are you going, buddy?" I asked, and he told me he needed help. His truck had broken down a kilometer ahead, but no one was passing by to help him. I told him to get in, that I would take him and try to help him with my tools. The man got in and was very quiet. I asked him what company he worked for, but he didn't answer. Then I asked if he was okay, because his clothes were torn and a bit dirty. But again, he didn't say a word. We had passed the kilometer he mentioned, and we should have arrived at the place where his truck was. But there was still nothing. I asked if it was further ahead, but he just pointed ahead with his finger, signaling me to continue on my way. So I did. But as time passed, I started to get increasingly annoyed because there were no trucks on the side of the road, and I realized we had returned to where I had picked him up. At kilometer 62, I was very surprised, because even though I had only driven straight, it was impossible for us to return to the same place. I didn't understand what was going on. The man hadn't said a word since he got into my truck, so I decided to pull over and tell him to get out, because this situation didn't feel right to me. The man got out without saying anything, without thanking me, and without looking at me. I saw him walking towards the mountains and disappearing there. I didn't want to leave him there, but he was no longer visible. He had disappeared into the bushes. I didn't know what to do, because I knew it wasn't right to leave him there alone. Just then, another truck passed by and stopped in front of me. The driver got out and came to my door to talk to me. I got out to see what he wanted. He said, "Friend, you should leave here. Did you see a man hitchhiking?" I said, "No, I didn't." I asked him how he knew that. He told me he drove down this road almost every day, and that the hitchhiker had been in an accident and died right where my truck was parked. He explained that he had been hitchhiking with truckers for years, and that the hitchhikers had disappeared, that a friend of his hadn't heard from him a year ago, that they had been joking and chatting on the radio as they passed that kilometer, that his friend had said he would pick up a man who looked like he had been in an accident, and that they would talk again on the radio later. Then he hung up, and we never heard from him or his truck again. Many other truckers said this man always hitched rides with truckers there, and took the few who decided to stop to Limbo, where he was stuck, which is why they were never heard from again. I thanked him for stopping and telling me what had happened. I thanked him for taking the time to let me know. He said it was no problem, that as colleagues we should support each other. Finally, he said I would see the place where that man stopped to hitchhike again, that if I passed by there again I would probably see him again, but that I should ignore him and keep going. Then the man left, and I left, but to this day, I will always wonder why that poor soul was hitchhiking. Another story worth telling happened to me before I retired. I was traveling with a coworker on the road from Mexico City to Cuernavaca. It was early in the morning, and I was about to fall asleep. So my friend took the wheel, and I was going to get some sleep in the cabin. When he took the wheel, I was about to lie down in the back seat when Gerardo said to me, "Look at that." I opened the curtain and looked outside and saw an animal walking on two legs approaching our truck. We couldn't tell what it was yet because it was still far away, but it looked very strange and even scary. My coworker asked me if it was an animal, a person, or something else. I told him to get away from there. Whatever it was, it wasn't good. He tried to start the car, but it had rained and there was a lot of mud, and our car was stuck in the mud. He kept trying to get out of there, but the truck wouldn't move. That thing was getting closer and was gradually taking the shape of an animal, like an ox standing on two legs. Suddenly, it stopped and didn't advance toward us. We kept our eyes on it, thinking it wanted to attack us. I told my friend to pull over and that I would try to move the truck, but my efforts were in vain. One of us had to get out and see which way to turn the wheels, but neither of us wanted to do it. That thing was still standing there, looking at our truck. I decided to get out to finish the job, but my friend told me that thing was waiting for us to get out so it could attack or do something to us. I told him I didn't believe in that kind of thing, that he shouldn't be so superstitious, but he said, I didn't feel the heavy energy he'd been feeling since that thing appeared. Actually, I felt it too, and I felt a fear I had never felt before. It was a very strange environment, but I told him that no, I didn't feel anything, and that it would be better if he helped me get out of there. I told him, please don't get out, listen to him. My grandfather was a truck driver for decades, and he told me that if I ever saw a two-legged animal in a deserted place, I should run away because it's the worst thing imaginable, and I should pray to drive it away. I told him I always carried a picture of God on the dashboard, which my wife put there to protect me, and that we could use it. Without hesitation, he took it and began praying loudly. He asked me to join him, and we did. Suddenly, we saw that thing start howling very, very loudly, as if it were standing right next to us. I started sweating, and my legs were shaking. My God, I had never been so scared. We kept praying over and over again until that thing started walking backwards. It wasn't watching us, but it was moving away, and its terrifying howls gradually faded until we lost sight of it. My friend said to me, "It's time," and quickly got out and asked me where to drive the truck. He figured it out very quickly, and we got away from there as fast as we could. As a truck driver in my life, this was undoubtedly the most terrifying, spine-chilling, and unsettling thing that ever happened to me. My name is Manuel, and I've been hauling goods with my trailer for several years. It's a very demanding, responsible, and dangerous job, because sometimes I have to travel on many roads in Mexico, and some of these roads are more dangerous than others due to sharp turns or crime rates. However, the story I'm about to tell you far surpassed both of those things. That night, I had been driving for hours. I was on the road between Tamaulipas and San Luis Potosi. The roads between the mountains were filled with very dangerous curves. It was a tough road, and as if that weren't enough, a very heavy rain started. I had very little experience at the time, and to be honest, I was a little nervous. The bends on that road were very difficult, especially at night and in rainy weather. As I said, I had been driving for hours, so I started to get sleepy. I knew it was dangerous to keep driving like this, so I knew I needed to stop and rest a bit. But the next rest stop was very far away, so I pulled over and looked for a place where I could sleep in the cab for an hour. I parked just in front of a hill, went into the woods, stopped my truck, and took my umbrella and flashlight to go to the bathroom. Then I returned to my truck, but as I walked, I saw muddy footprints on the passenger side steps of my truck, and the door was ajar. The light inside was on, and I had left both doors closed. I was very scared because I thought someone had gotten into the truck while I was using the restroom. So I slowly opened the passenger door and shone my flashlight inside and asked, "Who's there?" "You have to get out," but no one answered. So I decided to open the cabin curtain very slowly. But before I could open it completely, I heard a man crying, "Please help him, help him." I pulled the curtain open in one go, but there was no one there. How could that man have been calling out to me from inside? I started shaking, but I hadn't noticed that on the bed, in the corner, covered in grass and mud, was a very old and dirty baby carrier, some parts broken. I was very surprised because I didn't know how it got there. I picked it up and threw it away. It had come from my truck, and it didn't sit well with me. I closed the door and started my trailer. I didn't want to sleep anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. I was very tense because of what I had experienced, and I was also very tired because I hadn't slept for almost 20 hours. While trying to get out of that mountain, I hit something. I backed up a little and got out to check what it was. Could something have happened to my truck? I walked forward. I saw 3 large concrete crosses, and my truck had broken 2 of them. I approached to take a closer look. On the ground was a small gravestone with the inscription, "Pena Almanza Family. Rest in peace," and a framed photo. The photo showed a woman, a man, and a baby who looked about a year old. Apparently, they had been in an accident there and lost their lives. At that moment, everything made sense. I realized that those tracks and the voice I heard were from that man, that suffering soul who wanted me to save his baby. I started crying because my wife was pregnant, and I was about to become a father very soon. I couldn't even imagine the terrible pain that man must have felt, trying to protect his daughter even though he was dead. It's a heartbreaking story that will never be forgotten. Thank you very much for watching this video. I invite you to subscribe for more scary content. Like the video and share it with your friends. There's a lot of content coming. Help me spread the fear.